You see the machine eating the city. And you see the city as a grid built for maximum compliance. The avenues lock the wind into the fixed vectors. Police cruisers idle at the red lights like livestock. People move in pre-authorized channels, ride, share, delivery, the managed dream of optimized commerce where even detours are patented. You understand this before you put a single wrench in a single crankcase. This was always the point. The bike was not freedom. The bike is the knife you press into the membrane of the map. You tell yourself, getting the most out of the least is time travel. Buckminster Fuller said it is before anyone at City Hall ever heard themselves think. He meant structures, you mean bodies. He meant synergetics, you mean neurological sovereignty. This is what you learned before you even said moped, or Vespa, or Chow, or Derby, or Puch, or Motobacan, or Solex. This is what you learned before you ever said moped. When the system taxes movement, anything that slips the tax becomes a threat. You see the treats of the loin before they have a name. Yeah, they're the creatures. You see them scattered across the tenderloin like a fault line at Nonankuri. Chefs, Cantonese, autodidactics, Tibetans, nomads, acid-dealing expulsions from British boarding schools, people who understood that body moving under its own combustion is a refusal. You watch Benjamin smile at the stoplight. He isn't smiling at romance, at the romance of combustion, no. He is smiling because no one can price the state of mind he just entered. You don't need doctrine for that. It's instinct. It's poesis. It's distributed enlightenment that looks like delinquency to anyone without access. You see cognitive terraforming done with a Polini carburetor. You see tuning not as torque optimization, but as neural reformatting. You tune because every jet swap lowers prior assumptions. You port because every 1/10 of a millimeter teaches you about risk. You run a bike at night without a headlight, not because you want to crash, but because your cortex rearranges itself when you can believe you might. You tell yourself the truth that no therapist wants to hear. You tune the rider, not the bike. You learn the pharmacology of presence through metallurgy. You learn hierarchy through gearing ratios. 1421, right? You learn insurgency through topographical shortcut. This is not nostalgia. This is distributed university. This is a distributed university. You see mushrooms as typography. You see 50 wet weight grams of cyanesians curled into a word treats on a paper towel, not as art, but as psychedelia, but as evidence. The seasons give you 4 months of neurochemical adjacency in Golden Gate Park, and you use every one of them. You're not picking mushrooms, you are picking entry points. Carry a map rolled up of the park, it's long. You're dropping your priors until the glial pathways open like fiber optics. You are reminding yourself that cognition is edible. This is not disobedience, this is literacy. You see the newspaper call you the gayest gang since the Hell's Angles. You see the misspelling, Hell's Angels, Hell's Angles, and know what you're doing. You know that the editor will correct it. You know that the correction is the joke. You know that the joke is the weapon, because the straight line thinkers want the motard energy, the jocks, the V-twin, the certainty, the bandwidth of dominance. You wanted recursion. You wanted self-editing brain. You wanted 10 men or women who could rebuild top ends blindfolded, but could also quote the board without flinching. So you built a filtration system or a flirtation system. And yes, half the gang was queer, half the gang was women. Queerness is a refusal to default pathways. Queerness is recursive poesis and beatnik culture feeding back on post-structuralism. Queerness is you weren't actually selecting identity. No, I checked X on the box because it stood up for my neighbors. You were selecting neurochemical architecture. You see Brandon Wallace as a misread system. You see the headlines, Petaluma man rams sheriff vehicle, Petaluma man crashes into water, Petaluma man attempts escape, and you know Petaluma man is Brandon Wallace, Brandy, and he flooded the Petaluma River with 2CD and swam while they tried to drown him with helicopter blades for 2 hours. But he got rid of the 2CD, and the fish are now all high, and everyone who fishes those fish has been high and learning like they were on phenethylenes. But you know why they never print this? And what they never print is that the Tibetan kilometer and the Soma bicycle and the cordon bleu discipline and the ungentrified mind is Brandy. You know what schizophrenia looks like when the world has no language for anti-hegemony? You watched him work off a sentence in your garden, a barter system older than law. They called him dangerous because he did not freeze, because he refused arrest as ontology, because a man who will not sit still or is a loose algorithm in a culture of enforcement. I saw the women in their car from their Instagram feed behind him. They were in their 70s. They said, maybe we should move. And the sniper pulled up in a soccer mom van, put on a vest, and was nearly going to blow his head off. And Brandy got back in his vehicle, pulled a BB gun on them, and bashed them repeatedly and took off. They call him dangerous because he did not freeze, because he refused the arrest of as ontology, because he was a man who would not sit still, and he was loose, an algorithm in a culture of enforcement. An algorithm in a culture of enforcement. You know the truth? He is not crazy. He's unlicensed. You see the tenderloin as a wormhole. You see the moped propulsion as temporal compression. 6 blocks in 2 minutes. A bypass. A surveillance. A gap in predictable time. Every movement is a rehearsal of neurological independence. The bike is a tuning fork. The city is a testing chamber. You ghost ride in the park, not because you are reckless, maybe, but because fear is the neural solvent. Light hits the cortex, priors dissolve, identity liquefies, the cognitive terraforming is happening. This is cognitive terraforming. You see capital try to tax that. You see American Apparel refuse you a check. You see strawberries and you use them as velocity. You force a man who owns a vertically integrated sweatshop empire to dial your number on conceit. You understand leverage. If the world didn't give you legitimacy, take liquidity. This is not criminality, this is equilibrium. You see ephemeralization as a weapon. You take Fuller's gospel and rewrite it in the margins, doing the most with the least amount of horsepower, temporal insurgency. You reconvince E and you reconceive E equals MC squared, not as physics, but as hinge for identity, where E is energy, and now it is lambda delta times recursion is time-bound identity. Light becomes the cognitive interface, lambda becomes the play, recursion becomes the individuation. And when two asynchronous waveforms meet, you generate a new self. Where they stand, you can call it a ridge. I'll call it the weather. Crash what must be crashed and bind what must be bound. The Luciferian way is the only way to the revolution of the everyday life. And when these asynchronous waves meet, you will generate a new self. When the piston climbs its torque, its stroke, you edit destiny. This is not metaphor. This is an equation of survival. Metaphor drifts, but we leave our metaphors screaming in the wind. And at the end, you ask yourself a question, a simple question. What's your ride? Not what vehicle do you own? What engine? Not what engine do you trust? Not what brand you wear? What velocity do you use to outrun the story they built for you? Because that is the only sovereignty left. Not the home, not the job, not the passport, not the neural model of corporation trains over your attention, but the vector, the refusal, the moment where the pistons fire and the priors melt and the cortex rewrites the terms of engagement. That's the treats. That's the ephemeralization. That's the cognitive succession. And yes, that is art.